Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This morning, when I was checking for the last time the preparation, I said out loud that nothing can go wrong. I don't have anything to do with internet connection. My laptop is loaded and so on. And just before the beginning, my chunky European adapter broke. So I hope this is not the beginning of a series of misfortunate events. And thanks to Evan for saving me with the first problem. So what I'll be talking about is command line client based on Zend Framework 2 for DevOps automation. This means that those of you that are here to learn a bit how to create a command line client using Zend Framework 2, they'll get hopefully good information. Those of you that are here and are wondering, shall I create a command line client on other thing, also will get a good information. And the example that I'll give you is for DevOps automation, and you can use it also for other things. So the source code which will be demonstrated is open source. You can, right after the talk, clone it and use it to extend the functionality, report bugs, or just use it for your company purposes. So, a bit of information about myself. I'm Slavej Karajov, for those of you that haven't seen me before. I'm senior consultant and Zend Technologies. I'm working for Zend Germany. So if you're from Europe and you want somebody to consult you, there is a high chance that I'll be the one coming to you. I'm certified engineer and not developer in Zend Framework, still Zend Framework 1, and in PHP. I'm not putting the versions because they are changing quite often. So I have experience with PHP, but I have experience also with other languages. And I love to dig into other languages, not to be limited to one. And last, I'm author of the book, brand new book called Learn ZF2. It will give you a good insight how to start creating a project with Zend Framework 2. And hopefully with the help of core developers and community, the book will be even better. So let's go through the agenda. I'll be talking about the ZendServer WebAPI because mainly the client will be accessing this ZendServer WebAPI and we'll be communicating with it. Then I'll talk a bit high level about console line clients, why they are good. Do you think that, is there anyone who disagrees that console line clients are good for automation or good for usage? Where a human is not involved, mostly. Okay. And then I'll show you the implementation that I created. It's not the perfect one. Probably it will never be, but it's a very good start for something to implement. Then for those of you that really want to know about this particular client, I'll show you a bit about the usage. I'll try to explain how you can get help from the client without reading additional documents somewhere. The client has a composer integration. Once you learn what is the client about, then I'll try to make a live demo. So here comes the thing. Maybe something will break at that moment, but I hope that the fate is on my side. And then we'll have a session for question and answers. I usually leave more time for question and answers. So if you have prepared already one, you can prepare a second one or a third one. Or maybe I'll be answering them during the talk. So let's start with the ZendServer WebAPI. For those of you that are not familiar with ZendServer, this is a bit of information. It's like application server for PHP. It uses the standard Apache on Nginx. It uses almost the standard modules, and that's additional functionality that can help you to improve your PHP in a couple of ways. So when you're running your PHP, it can help you with the performance. It can help you with deploying of applications on on a huge cluster, and it can help you with managing. So if you have one server, of course, it's quite easy to manage it, but when you have 20, the effort increases a lot. And using ZendServer, you can do this. So it also allows you to control almost everything remotely. So it's quite good for third-party integration. If you have already existing system for monitoring, for example, then you can quite nicely integrate it. If you have other systems for continuous delivery, you can use also ZendServer to do this. There is a bit more information on the link below. And if you want to give it a try, there is a 7 days free version with the full functionality. And after that, you can still use it, but some of the parts will be disabled. Okay, now the WebAPI is something, it's a service which is coming with ZendServer that allows you to remotely control this functionality. So it allows you to do a couple of things. Deployment with configuration. You can, for example, enable, disable modules. You can change configuration directives. And you can use this to automate, for example, creating a new server. If you have already your Puppet and Chef scripts and you installed ZendServer, then maybe you want to have a specific configuration for production. You can use the WebAPI and instruct the server remotely what to do. So at the end, you can have the complete sequence automated from plugging the machine into the network to having a running ZendServer. And with the WebAPI, we already have some tools, third-party tools that allow you to consume it. I'll call them clients here. One of them, which is coming with ZendServer, it's called ZS Manage. And of course, if you want, you can write your own third-party client. And some of the companies are doing this. So I'll show you, probably it's not quite visible here, how a command looks like. The command has a unique name. After that, it has some parameters that you can pass. The parameters can be different types. So the easiest strings, they can be also arrays, they can be files. Then a parameter that can be optional or can be mandatory. The function itself can have requirements for the methods, HTTP methods to use. So it can be post or get, or maybe in the future another one. And also it has different responses. It has a XML response, it has a JSON response, and it gives you sometimes, depending on the command that you're using, also just binary data. So if you're writing yourself such a client, you have to take care for all that stuff. Now, we wanted to, first maybe I'll change the slides. There are already existing command line clients, and we try to recommend this to our customers, but there are a couple of issues. For example, the ZS Manage is part of the complete ZendServer distribution. So suddenly for installing something that is as size maybe 20 megabytes, you have to install the complete ZendServer. This was stopping some of the customers. I completely understand this. Also, it wasn't available on Windows or other systems which ZendServer supports. And it's not so easy to extend. By easy, I mean we're dealing with not with professional programmers most of the time. We're dealing with people that were system administrators and suddenly ended up also extending PHP applications. And they are okay if you change something in the configuration line and have everything ready, but if you have to go into classes, know about object-oriented programming and so on, then it's not so easy. And the last, but maybe the most important reason why we decided to try to create our own console line client was that not all of the methods were supported. And okay, we said let's implement them again. Let's add the ones that are missing. But it turned out that for every method you have to add 5 classes. So not that we cannot do it, but it's a bit of overkill. Then we have already existing Java SDK. It works perfectly. It has almost the latest versions. But then when you go to a company which is dealing mainly with PHP and you tell them, please install the Java SDK, there is a huge, huge resistance. It's like, oh no. Okay, so we decided to go for some client of our own, which will hopefully have tackled all the disadvantages and which can help us for the automation and for the integration with other systems. So first, command line client is really good for these two things, automation and integration, because we don't need to produce some nice looking information. We're just passing data and we're getting data back. We need to put a bit of logic here and there, but the only thing that the user of this application needs to know is maybe what parameters to type, if there is a specific order, how to do it, if he needs to pass the values in a specific way, how to do it. And this knowledge has to be, in our own opinion, he needs to get this knowledge like in 1 minute maximum, so that he knows how all the functions are working. And also we try to keep close to the Unix principles. So if our console line client doesn't have to say something important, just doesn't return anything. So what we think are the requirements for successful console line client for customers that are using mainly PHP. So it has to run on every system where PHP is supported. Hopefully the latest PHP 3 or further version. Another thing, it has to be small. So it has to be maximum 10 megabytes. It has to be easy to use. And if the people extended their web interface, for example, it has to be also the WebAPI part was extended for some reason, then the client has to be easily extended just by typing some configuration. And also it has to allow way to put inline documentation, not offline documentation. For me, it's always important to have these two in sync and to be easily accessible. So if you have it somewhere in the client itself, this will be great. Or if you ship it as a manual file. So we decided to, in the beginning, try ourselves something, which had some rough ideas as a prototype, but then we thought that Zend Framework 2 has a console line support, and we decided to give it a try. So now you say, you said it has to be small, it has to be just one file, self-contained, and then you're suddenly using Zend Framework 2. Well, there are ways how we can make this really small, self-contained, and I'll tell you. It's not a secret. We'll be using something called PHAR, P-H-R, A-R. So, first, why we decided to go to Zend Console or the Zend Framework 2? Well, maybe because we're Zend and would like to try our own caviar and test it, how it works. Also, I'm a bit biased towards Zend Framework 2. I like the way that you can just choose simple components. I can really achieve my goal and limit the size. I can say, for that application, I don't need the complete Zend Framework. I need just that part. And the next thing is Zend Framework 2 has a good composer support. So I can limit myself in the beginning just to creating a composer JSON file. this is a descriptive file where I specify what requirements I have. For example, I'd like to have Zend console, I'd like to have some other tools for processing the data, and Composer is a dependency management tool, will automatically figure out what are the other components that are needed. So that was one of the reasons why we decided to go for this. Now, the next thing is, and it's, I think, quite important, Zend Framework 2 is very popular. So Zend Framework 2 is supported from a lot of people, very live community. I see some of the members here, so I'd like to thank you on the stage. And it has a good chance that in the next 5-10 years this will continue to be supported and to develop further. So if we want to have something really well to maintain, and another thing is if the main developer of this application just left, we can quite easily invite somebody who is knowing Zend Framework 2 or is Zend Framework 2 certified. So there is no huge effort for us as a company to continue the development of such an application. And on the bottom, I've written that it allows me to write clean code to separate different concerns. And I've written also other keywords, but the main thing is you can put your core logic and you don't need to pollute it with additional logic before that or after that. For those of you that are familiar with aspect-oriented programming or methodology, this is the core idea. So the easiest way for a programmer to figure out something is if he is able easily to see where is the core business logic. If it's spread, polluted everywhere, this is no good. Okay, now, if I want to start using the Zend Framework components, what can I do is I started in the beginning putting a lot more components because I didn't know which one would be really required for me. So I said, let's try with all of them. And this is the Composer JSON file that I was talking about. So in the Composer JSON, you put here information about the application, not that important. And then you specify which should be the required components. So that's what I decided to go for. And now, the ones that are appearing in bold now are the more important. So you can use Zend console, then you can use Zend HTTP, and Zend MVC. Zend console, for the reasons that I'll be communicating with the customer using the console line client, and it has already support for printing the data, printing help, and so on. I don't want to do this myself. It has support also for parsing the parameters. I don't want to create my own parser that figures out if a parameter was optional or mandatory, if it was having the correct value, and so on. HTTP is the component that can help me to communicate with the remote server, because for the WebAPI I need to do that communication. And MVC is the part which helps me to separate the code. So you probably can go only with the first two, with Zend console and Zend HTTP, but I really prefer to have the things separated. So the other thing is, when you start using Zend console for the roots, this is probably the most scary part. You can describe your command using the Zend Framework roots. So you need to specify a console root. That's the important key here. And then for every command that you want to be available to the end user, you can specify in here directly what is the command doing. So you can say this is the command that I want. I want to have one mandatory parameter which accepts some value here. And then I want to have an optional parameter. You can specify also Boolean parameters for which you don't specify value. If you just remove here the equal sign, then it will mean that the presence of this can be treated as yes or no. Then, since I'm using MVC, I can specify which controller and action should take care for this. I can specify also some additional information. I can specify, for example, what should be the HTTP method to be used from my HTTP client. Now, when I specify parameters, you may think that the bash shell or the Windows shell will try to help you with file names, resolving file names, and other things. That's not the case. If you want to create a console line client which is dealing with paths, then you have to do a bit more effort. And you want to have this client available through all systems. So what I did here is I decided, okay, I'd like to describe also the parameters which are treated, which are expecting a file name to be given, and then I'll put additional effort to figure out where is the correct location. If it's special absolute path, if it's absolute path, okay, but if it's a relative path, if it's using special signs for the different operating systems or bash systems, then I can deal with it. And then I decided to put also another parameter here, which is the information about the command. Now, if you have this information here, it's quite easy after that to extract this information and show it to the user of the application, who can see what is really going on. So for every command, you have to put such a declaration. And in 99 of the cases, here's where your interaction or extending of this specific client ends. You don't need to put anything more. That's it. Just describe it. It's more or less human reading what is the documentation of the function and then implementing it here into this file. Now, when we start using the console line client, we need to create a module, and we need to specify that we're using console usage provider interface and console banner interface. So the second one, the console, they require us to put some functions inside of our module. And the second one, get console banner, is the one that is just displaying information about the client. Not the help, just name or something on the top. Now, the usage one is the more interesting one, because this is the one where the command that you typed cannot be found, or the command that you type can be found, but the parameters that you gave didn't match the requirement that you specified. And Zend Framework 2 takes care to deal with this. You don't have to take care. Now, if something happens and the command is not matching the rules, then inside of the get console usage, you can specify what should happen. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. Now, how many of you are familiar with Zend Framework 2? Okay, good. In Zend Framework 2, in comparison to all the versions of the framework or all other old frameworks, what we have is we have event-driven model. So we have, let's say it like steps. We have a step where the configuration is merged. Generally speaking, preparation step, something is happening. And then we have a step where every module that is loaded is bootstrapped. So on this specific place, if I have an onBootstrap method, I can say that I'd like to do something more. What can be this something more? Well, when I have the parameters and they were correctly specified, from the console line client, I can give them a string, nothing more. Giving an array, it's not so easy. So then I need to take care for this. I have a string representation of the array, and I have to turn it into array internally into the PHP. If I use this, attach this event, so once the root is correct, after it, I can process this data and see what's going on. Also, since I'm producing different results based on the command that I'm using, I'd like, before I finish, to do something, to check what was the expected type from the client and return it. Or if the function is not allowing you to vary with the types, but is giving you always binary data, just to take care to return the binary data and not to return something else. So here you have an attach method. Priority -2 means that it will be, or priority lower than 1 means that this event listener will be executed after the actual event root, and priority higher than 1, in my case it's 100, means that it will be executed before that. I named them on purpose like post-root and pre-finish, just to give additional hints when they will be executed. So, now, how is the actual post-processing of the parameters? I have the parameters. I have also the configuration with the console routes. What I can do is I can search for specific settings. In my case, I showed you that I have files declared. And then for those parameters that were expected to be files and that were provided from the end user, what I can do is I can change their value, or I can change it based on specific rules. What I have here is something like a path service, which takes this file value and tries to convert it into a real path. Then for the console usage, what I did is first the get console usage method expects you to return an array. And it has a very interesting format. In the array, if you specify an element, which is string, it will be printed nicely on the complete line. If you specify an element, which is an array with 2 elements inside of it, then the first part will be printed indented a bit, then there will be space, and then the second part. Perfect if you want to specify, for example, this parameter actually does the following. Or this is the command which does this, and then you can specify the parameters. And what I'm doing here is I'm getting again information about the roots, and I'm checking if there is a info key in this specific array. And if there is an info key, I'm putting it to the final usage. Okay, so once we have the parameters, here comes the question how I can read them. And what you can do is you can go for this get request get param, specify the parameter name, and get the information. There is also in Zend Framework 2 there is also a shorter version. Just say this params and the name of the parameter. So this will give me what I want, and I'm done with reading the input parameters. Now I can deal with something more. I can deal with what shall I return. In Zend Framework 2, you are highly advised not to do things like I've seen people doing in Zend Framework 1, like echoing the final result and then exit on the next line. We have response object, just use it. Put the content that you want to return on the response object. And then Zend Framework 2 will take care to format this nicely so that it looks good on the different terminals, and it will do much more than you can do yourself by echoing the data. There is one more thing. By default, what you're getting if something goes wrong in your application. So you may say nothing can go wrong, but in the morning this happened to me, so always be prepared for something like this. By default, what you're getting is complete trace take, with the errors. So if there was an exception which wasn't catched, the end user can see this. Now, I thought I don't want to scare the end user. He may have no clue about PHP at all. So I'd like to just show him the message of the exception without the stack trace. And you can achieve this quite nicely. You can override the getConfig method. And here, You can specify in the View Manager section exception message, and you can say what should be inside of the template. What I did is I was reading a variable from the environment, debug, and if this is not present, which is most of the cases when somebody starts running the command, then if there is an error, I'll say, okay, this is the error. And if somebody says, but I cannot figure out myself what's the error, then I can answer him, just put the debug -1 equal, debug equals 1, and then execute your command, and you can give me quite useful hints what's happening. So that's the initial setup of a console line application. This setup, I hope you find it useful also for your own console line client if you decide. Now, comes the thing, I prepared some stuff. I'm ready to pass parameters. I'm ready to output data. But can I ship 20 components, even 5 components of Zend Framework together with my PHP file and say the customer, you know, go to the public directory or some other directory, then run index.php, but be careful where you run it. You have to run it from the same directory where the application is, and so on. And I thought, it's not working. So you can, if you have help, even one line explaining what the customer can do, and if it's not intuitive, it's destined to fail. So my idea was I'll use var. Var allows you quite nicely to package the PHP into one file, and then you can distribute this file. And if you want to execute it, either make it executable or say PHP and this one file. Then the customer cannot say I couldn't find the file because it's this one file. And then inside of it, you can add a bit more to take care that this application can be executed from anywhere, and it doesn't need to be from the current directory where this application is. So how to create a var file? I put in some basic information. So what you usually do is you create an instance of var, then you have something like start buffering, stop buffering, and then you have also a stop, which will be executed when this application starts. You don't need to know how to do it, because you can just grab what I did and use it further on. This is something that you write once and forget about it. So now the main usage of the application. Here comes the part where I'll talk more about this specific application, because there are people that of course want to communicate, and also this topic was in the section under doc tools, or I don't remember exactly the name, but not quite famous tools that are working well. So if you want to get information about, if you want to get help, I thought just typing the command, pressing enter should be enough. So this is working out of the box. Plus there is, or if you use Zend console of Zend Framework 2, plus if you specify -- help, this also will give you the help information. Now, the WebAPI, when we started, had maybe 10 commands. 10 commands is nothing, but when you put also information what the command is doing, and when you put also the parameters and you put description about the parameters, it starts to take half of the screen. At the moment we have like 90 or maybe more commands. It's massive amount of information. Nobody will read it. So what I decided to do is I decided to group them somehow. And I don't want to give that complete information to everybody, to everyone when he starts and scare him away. I decided to group these commands, and if he types help, then what you'll see is what are the different groups and how he can get information for a specific group. So then for a specific command inside of the group, what you can do is you can again use the -- help option, and then it will give you for this specific command all what you need. And if you're brave enough, or there are some depreciated functions, you can just say command all, and this will give you the complete list. I use this because sometimes I'm forgetting how, where's the command, was it in that monitoring section or it was in monitoring rules section, so it is quite good. Now, how is the command line client working? Since we're communicating with a server, with the Web API, we need to provide some information so that the Web API can authorize us. Can say, okay, you're the one, I agree with you. And what we need to pass is we need to pass first the location of the server against which we'll be authenticating, we'll be talking. Then you need to pass credentials, and when we use the Web API, they're in the forms of key, which is the public information, and then there is a secret, which is very difficult to guess, hopefully string. And once you have this information, and this is correct, you authenticate from the server, then you can do the rest. Now, instead of specifying this information constantly for every command, what I decided to do is give you the possibility to just save this information on the file system. And you can say add target, you can specify the target name, this has to be unique, and then you can specify the different parameters. Key, URL, version of ZendServer also if you want. Then once you start, once you have this saved, it will be saved in the home directory of the current user under a file called .zsapi.ini. You can manually go and see it if you want. The next thing is there are commands for packaging. So not everybody has Zend Studio, and not everybody has ZendServer on his system, client system where he is deploying to the Zend server. So if you want to add packaging to already existing project, he just needs to say init zpk and specify the folder. If he doesn't specify the folder, it runs on the current one, current working directory. Now, if he wants to create a package, he just can say pack zpk, specify where's the location. If he needs, he can specify destination and additional things. And now, once he has the package, which is a ZPK file, something like a zip file with a bit more meta information in it, he can just install it. And what he needs to provide is the file. He needs to provide the target containing here all that data. He needs to provide the base URI, and if needed, other parameters. Now, this is the thing that I had to do with the current Web API that we're using, but I didn't want to, because if you specify a Boolean parameter, if you specify in the declaration of the command line a Boolean parameter, if you put something, it will be treated as true, and if you don't put something, this will be treated as false. So the default will be always true. The default will be always false if you just don't specify it. The thing is, in the ZendServer Web API, this is not the case. Sometimes the default value for parameter is true, but sometimes it's false. So I have to explicitly give this. Now, with this tool, what you can do is you can change configuration. Just for brevity, I put here two commands. The first one is telling you how we can turn extensions off. So in here, I'm specifying a MySQL, GG, and FTP. And this string, I'll show you later on, is actually, I'm expecting for this string to be turned after that into an array. So just comma separation for me is enough to get something and to turn it into a normal array. Then I have another command which has this directive, and here the things are a bit more difficult. So I'm expecting not only to know some values, but I'm expecting to have indexes and values. And in this case, I'm using just the HTTP query format that you can get. And I guess all of you dealing with web are familiar with this. So you just specify the key, the value, separate it with and then the rest. You can also, I guess all of you are more or less familiar with PHP. In PHP there is a trick how you can pass an array. So you can use also the square brackets here to pass also inside of this array another array. So it's quite flexible when you specify array data. Now, the tool has also composer integration. The star is because this is still in development, composer integration. The only reason that it's still in development, I couldn't figure out easy way just to get the PHP classes and get information about dependencies and so on. That's why I'm using the full Composer client. If somebody from Composer is here, please tell me how I can do it really easily. Okay, no one. So with the Composer integration, what you can do is we have this tool Composer. It helps us to put our packages somewhere on the internet. I want to try one package. It's either on the packages or my private repository. I can just get it from using Composer install, and then I want to deploy it on all the Zend servers that I have. Here comes the thing. I know only information about Composer, but never heard about deployment XML or other files that I have to put in my package. And I want to be really fast when I want to test this. So what we do is we save you the trouble when you save you from troubles. When you decide to pack your application, you just need to specify that it's a Composer application. What it will do, it will change the deployment XML so that it includes the correct information, like name, dependencies on other applications. It will download the applications. If you have some libraries, they'll be downloaded, they'll be packaged, and at the end, what you have is you just have a list of things that you have to deploy. And if you're using command line tools, you can, I think I have it also in the slide, you can quite easily deploy Composer application on your 20 servers. Now, if you want to use the Composer, if you just give it a try for the Composer integration, you need to get information from the Composer branch. So all the source code is stored in Git. We have branches there, and Composer is the second available branch. I was very kindly asked from the big bosses not to merge the Composer integration inside of the main tree because it's not tested, and I fully understand them. So here's the slide which helps you to install on all of your servers an application which has Composer inside of it. We just this is for those of you that are familiar with Bash. This is a Bash two-liner or a couple of liners. The first line is creating the packages. It will produce a list of packages, and the second one is iterating over all of them and installing them. If the install app command is a higher level command, you will not find it into the menu of the WebAPI, and it's trying to do to be a bit helpful. If in Zend server, if you have an application with a specific name, and if you try to install it a second time, Zend server will just reject it. Okay, then what you need to do, you need to make a second step, read what is the ID of the already installed application, use this ID, and then update. So these are 3 steps that you need to take care of. I decided, okay, it's always the same. Let's build it inside this high-level install app, and it's just trying to do everything for you. We have in Zend server also library support, which is slightly different than packages, and this command from the metadata of the package figures out what if you're trying to install an application or library, and tries to be smart and do the rest for you. So just by executing this command, you're good to go. Okay. Seems like it's time for demonstration, so I need to go to my real machine. Okay. And hopefully I can demonstrate you a couple of things here. So I'll go to my config. So what we did is the final client is actually a library and the console line client. We decided that we want to separate them because maybe there's some other need for somebody to use just the library with explanation of the information of the commands. And if you go to in here, this is the actual library, and we already have a friendly chap or lady which is doing Nagios integration just by using our library. So what we have here is we have the description of the commands. Now, they don't look different than I showed you in the slides. Here is, I have a configuration export. I saw in the menu that this is optional one and this is optional one. In the defaults, for some of the parameters, I can provide default values if that is needed. I can specify that in here I am expecting to have an array. And here's how the usage information is looking. Always the first line is the simple explanation of what this function is doing. And then I'm giving an example about the parameters, and at the end, I'm giving information about the parameters, and at the end, I'm giving an example how I can use this command. So this is our way of thinking that we will provide good information. If you think that there is a better way, you're not forced to use this one. You can just go for the other one. Okay, so this is basically how you describe the different commands. So if you're using old version of the tool and nobody wanted to enable it, to put a new command that is existing in ZendServer, what you need to do is probably copy this block here. I have to remember to revert my changes after that. Then if the command is say something, for example, I have to be sure that I'm specifying here something that the server can understand. I'm specifying the controller, the action that should be used. If there are different parameters, for example, if parameters that are mandatory, so ID equals like this, you can specify it. If it's optional, you can put it into this square brackets, and if it's some Boolean value, you can just leave it like that. So with this simple mechanism, you can cover, at least for the WebAPI, you can cover all the cases. Now, I'll show you also where's the actual parsing of the data. So if I go somewhere here, so okay, give me a second just to have a reproducible system. I have here all the things, the event listeners, and then I'm having here the information. So for the arrays, what I'm doing is I'm checking in a very simple way what type of array is provided. Is it a comma separated one, or it's the one that is containing query string? And if it's the one containing query string, I'm passing this data and producing some actual PHP array representation, and then I'm changing the value of the parameter. So the name stays the same, just the data is changed. The same applies for files. Why I'm doing this here? I told you in Zend Framework 2, in the beginning, you can quite easily separate the business logic. Now, if I had to do this in every controller, this is not the core logic of, or every action. This is not the core logic of this specific component. The core logic is pass some data to the server, return the information, and do it in a good way. I don't want to, in every action or in every controller, to take care to put the parsing of the data if such data is expected. So it's much easier to generalize and put it here in the post route. So for, okay, I'll show you what we have also for the help system. Okay. Hopefully it's in here. I apologize for those of you that are not used to seeing so much code on the screen. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help the customer figure out, or the user of the application figure out what's really going on. So in the get console usage, maybe Evan can help me here. I couldn't figure out what is the past command. I didn't have root information. So I go the old-fashioned way, just read the arguments. And this is the first command. So based on this command, I can figure out what the user wanted. So if the command was one of the specific commands, which the name is command colon something else, then I'm showing him the group of commands. If such a command already exists in the root definition, then I'm showing him exactly this specific help. And if nothing is found, then I'm going to the case where I'm just showing the different groups of commands. So when I'm talking about groups, I'm using this parameter to tell me which are the different groups. So some human needs to go there, and it's no black magic. Okay, well, what we have at the end is this array, and the array is returned, and there is a beautiful information shown on the screen. Before I go further, I would like to show you something more. So I have scripts here that help me to build semi-compile the final far file. And these scripts are something that you can grab now and use it also for your future application. So the first one is called create far, and this is how from an existing Zend Framework application you can create your far file. Important parts and control that you want to have here are given in that part, and you can also specify which files should be included. If you have testing cases, maybe you don't want to include them inside of the far file. So, and the other important part is to put also which is the script that should be run. So that's everything. If you stick to the same structure, if in your future Zend Framework 2 console line client, then you don't need to change something. What I did is I wanted, in some situations, and not inside when I'm running inside of the far mode, I wasn't able to figure out some paths or something wasn't exactly as expected. So I wanted to have a control over this, and I defined here, this is something that is executed every time when you run the far command. I decided to define a constant here, and I also defined a constant which is giving me the current working directory. If you use current working directory inside of the already compiled far file, then you have some strange results. And the last thing is we are coding the index.php file. So the index.php file doesn't look anywhere more spectacular than a normal index.php file in Zend Framework. And what I did is I also built this thing that can help me to get a clean source code from the branch, give me the dependencies, compile for me the new far file, ask me if I want to push it back to the main repository, and other stuff. So we are using this actually to automatically compile and test our client. So these are useful scripts, and the rest is just programming knowledge. I have 5 more minutes here, so I would like to show you how the things are looking. So this is my application. Now, if let me go back to here. If you if you're familiar with Composer, in Composer you can describe dependencies that are important for the running of the application, but you can describe also dependencies that are important for the testing development of the application. And what you need to do is you need to be careful when you decide to get the source code. So inside of my Composer JSON, let me first find it. It's in here. I'll go to here. I have specified just these parts that I'm needing for the application, but when I'm running PHP unit, it turns out, maybe you know a better way, but I have to get the complete Zend framework in order to have successful tests. So that's another thing that you have to be aware of. Okay, now, running the application, how does it look like? So, you can say PHP. I have it at the moment in bin ZS client var, and if I run it, and if I have correct compilation, then it will give me this sexy console line client. I have all the groups here of information with commands, and a bit of help that can help me with the next steps, plus information what I can do with Jira. So this information, as long as it's on one screen, it's not so scary for the end user, and he can, in my opinion, figure out how to continue. Now, if I want to see commands that are for configuration, for example, then I can do something like this, and then I get the complete list of commands that are for configuration. For a specific command, I have information about the parameters, I have some examples. So if the person have dealt with computers and console line clients in the last 1 year, maybe he'll be able to figure out what to do. I'm providing examples also in the cases where it's not so easy to figure out what should happen. And then the rest is just usage. So I want to add a target. I don't remember exactly what were the parameters. I can just specify add target, and this gives me the results. If I want to install an application, I can go for install app and do the rest. It would be quite nice if I have somehow support from the bash to tell me what are the commands, but this is out of the scope of PHP application that we have. So this is how you can create your application. If you want to test it without going anywhere near the source code, you can do the following. You can go to GitHub Zend pattern, Zend SDK, and inside here there is a README file which says just download this one and run it. That's it. If you want to extend it, if you want to create something on your own, then you can go to the development stuff. You need to clone, you need to use Composer, you need to install it with the specific no-def parameters, and you're ready to go. So that's what I wanted to tell you. Now it's time for questions. So okay. So the question was, if I have an application which is based on another library, for example, Zend Framework 2, shall I package it together or just do something else? The answer is you have to separate your application from your libraries. What you can do with Zend server or using this client, you can ask, is this application existing? Or you can just use install app, try to deploy your version. If the version is already there existing on the server, we make a quick check if this is the case, then you'll be using this one. So always separate them, because in the cases like Magento, your application can go more than 50 megabytes, and this takes time. Okay? Some other question? Okay. Okay, then I have a question for you. How many of you plan to create a console line client with Zend Framework 2? 1? Okay, 2? Good. I hope, guys, I gave you a bit of hints so that you continue further on. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the conference, and see you again. Thank you.